Hello, listeners, and welcome to another high-quality production from Matt and Al, the Joining the Dots podcast. And today, in our virtual studio, we have the one and only Bukky Yusuf. Bukky, lovely to see you.
Thank you, guys. Two of my favourite people in education.
Likewise.
Well, I was going to say the same, so stop stealing my script. Although, just in case anyone's figured, there's never a script in our conversations. We just let it flow. The thing I like best, because you are one of my fave person, Bukky, you have a heart of gold, and you are always reaching out to other people, and that's something that we often talk about, but actions and difference. So I very much value what you do across the system.
Thank you.
The sentence that you have on your LinkedIn profile, actually, I really like the most because I think it really respects much of what you do, which is helping leaders across the globe to smash glass ceilings. And I think that can be leaders, and it can be student leaders, and it can be adult leaders, and it can be professional leaders. But it's all about helping folks not set limits to their ambitions and aspirations. And for me, that really summarizes a big part of what you're about. So before we talk too much in specifics, because I know there's areas where you've got particular passion and interest, for those listening, just tell us a bit about where you see the biggest challenges right now with the young people that you're supporting, and how you're trying to shift the dial for them.
How long do we have? The biggest, where can we start in the fact that it feels really unsettled around the world, no matter where you are in the world. And I think it's very difficult for adults to feel secure in themselves and to plan and make meaning of things in that. Much less young people. So you've got that. You've got, again, the backdrop of the cost of living crisis and the impact and the implications of that, and still trying to learn in those particular circumstances. You've got the growing mental health crisis. We've got growing in terms of, there's a lot out there to contend with.
Okay, surely the challenge is phonics at the moment. That's the government position, isn't it? Phonics and making sure that we get a higher grade of maths and English at level 4 or above. The point I interrupt for jest is there's a lot of issues that are well beyond what we are measured on in our schools that are absolutely at the heart of everyday conversation, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I think, ask anyone who's in a school, ask any educator, they can tell you the reality. Yeah. I don't know what to say there. And what you said about the discrepancy as to the challenges, the reality of the challenges, and what is being focused on, I think that gulf is huge. And, you have educators stepping into the breach to do what they possibly can. But, I digress slightly in that regard. But yeah, there are a lot of challenges.
It feels like it gets worse every week, doesn't it, Bukky? I remember years ago, you sort of used to finish a school year thinking that was worse. That was harder than the last year. Then it was like every term was like, oh, that was harder than last term. And now it feels like every week you think, blimey.
Yeah.
That was harder than yesterday.
True. It's true. And it's interesting you say that, because again, this is all not to blame everything on the pandemic, but post-pandemic, I think it threw a lid on how many issues different people and sectors of society were actually encountering. And I think without the funds to meet these needs, schools are stepping into the breach. It's no surprise that schools are now described as, like the fourth emergency service. We are trying to do as much as we possibly can. And as a result of that, Matt, I agree with you. Year on year, I look back and I think, oh my God, that was hard. But then year on year, we're having to meet more challenging needs. So it's not surprising in that regard. And therefore, it doesn't surprise me about the fact that, there are many great educators who are no longer in schools, who are no longer in classrooms, because they just said, I've given as much as I can. I cannot give any more. And I get that.
One of the things that I wrote about this year, and it's a conversation that Matt and I have had with quite a few different guests, is around the concept of what makes a good school, and that distinction between what a report card or an Ofsted summary would say about your school, or maybe the newer format may say something different in a structured way about your school, and what, as educators stuck in a lift, you would describe as the most important things about your school if you were stopped by me in the street. And so I'm interested in what you define as a good school in the context of whether it's Edith K or other schools that you work with. What do you hold most dear?
Well, if I answer that in two parts, my school, what makes it, I think, a fantastic school to name but a few, it's the fact that it truly is child-centered. And obviously it's a very unique setting, alternative provision, stroke a special school. So we have to meet the needs of young people who, in a way, have been let down by mainstream education. So putting them up front and center in any decision, conversation, any focus, teaching and learning is really powerful. And to name Ofsted positively on this occasion, when we had our last Ofsted inspection, which I think about nearly 2 years ago, as soon as they stepped into the building, they said, you can really feel magic. And I think that with a good school, as soon as you step in there, is just something in the air, even from, like being in the reception area where it's very welcoming, where everybody is genuinely part of a school community and everyone knows their role and things like that. It sounds like a bit of a utopia, but teaching and learning is fundamental and important. However, that is part of ensuring that the whole person, the whole young person is taken care of and is being valued. And staff are clear about their role and their purpose into that as well. And I've often used this stick of rock analogy. I can't remember which particular educator mentioned it, that in a good school where there is clarity about the purpose of what is being done, why it's being done, and how that looks, it's a stick of rock from the school leadership, governance level, all the way down to classroom teaching assistants, school, even to like pupil leaders. That level of clarity is paramount. But it means that the young person, the people, are valued. So that, for me, is a good school, an excellent school.
I wish you were a bit more passionate about this topic, Bukky.
Can you see? Can I be honest and say the reason why I'm so passionate about it and the reason why I've stayed, I'll be honest and say, I've said to some people, both in public and private conversations, about the fact that when I applied to be at my school, the plan was be there for 2 years, take the learning about how to, support the needs of SEND students, and then go back into mainstream. Nearly 7 years, I'm still there because there's a reason for that. And I can look in, not mainstream. I'm a mainstream teacher. I've been doing that for a long time. But I just think that not all schools have the right priorities. And you can see that from the students and you can see that from staff. I've been in toxic schools where I just thought, God, if I'm struggling as an educator and I've got choice and agency to be here, what on earth is it like for the young people? And that's why I'm so passionate. For many young people, education is the one chance. I know it's challenging now, but it is the one chance to make a real meaningful difference, not just now, but in their lives. So I am passionate about it because I've seen the other side when it's not worked and there's not much in society that can support their needs. So, do something about it while we can. Anyway, I can go on, as you say, but yeah, it's very important to me.
I think you're right, though, in the concept. Like, I go to a lot of schools for various reasons, and as soon as you step into it,
Yes,
what it's like. I mean, you don't know the data and you don't know this and that, but you get that feel straight away. And a lot of it comes down to the people and the kids and their interactions. And if you walk into a quiet, somber atmosphere, straight away you think, well, kids will pick up on that as well. And
exactly.
Yeah, so you definitely get a feel for it. I'm involved in AP in the North East, Bukky, which is fascinating to me because in terms of how it meets the needs of every individual child that's there, these children have got backgrounds where mainstream education have failed them, and also they've got challenge in other circumstances.
Yes.
And these provisions, when they're all over the country and you're in one, how do they meet the needs of the kids? Often contrary to the national curriculum expectations, shall we say, is brilliant. And you think mainstream education's got so much to learn from it, but there's all the fear of accountability, isn't there?
There is, and you're right. It's a fear of accountability, and I think also it's working with unknowns, because year on year the needs of the young people. For example, if I say each year I find it more challenging, you think, right, I've met the needs of this particular group of young people. Yeah, bring on the next year, and it's different. The factors are different, the circumstances are different, the needs, even though it may be umbrella terms, but are wildly different. So there's a lot to factor in, to put in place to make right really quickly in a short amount of time. And mainstream, I see mainstream in a way as a huge ship. And it's very difficult. You need to put a lot of energy just to turn things slowly in the right direction. And I think that's part of that's part of the restrictions in place. That's the reality of what they're dealing with. So I can understand the thing, let's continue what we've done, and let maybe other sectors perhaps deal with those needs and support their needs, while it may not be necessarily right. I can understand that because we've got to, as I say, we're in challenging situations right now, circumstances.
I mean, the main ship, the big ship analogy is quite good, but is that big ship the Titanic? Has it hit an iceberg? Or is it?
I'm thinking shit. Well, I didn't expect you to say that. I'm just thinking about the band that continues to play. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
no.
I think that the mainstream education, it meets the needs of what? 55, 60% based on the criteria we set, or government sets in terms of grade 4 GCSEs, SATs, blah, blah, blah. Absolute nonsense. But if there was alternative provisions that were more accessible to everyone, how much of that 55, 60% would actually choose to take them as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's about flexibility. It's really, as I say, education and the educational sector in the UK particularly is really interesting because we are given autonomy, in quotes.
Wait, right.
And guidelines, but it's quite restrictive. It's about true flexibility. Ultimately, I see the role of the school leaders, the educators, to provide the type of curriculum that benefits the young people there. That's what we should be doing. And as you said, Matt, with the GCSE results, I mean, I teach science for crying out loud. A lot of students say, maths and English are the priorities, science doesn't get a look in, but it's about ensuring that where you can, you provide relevance in the curriculum. That would aid more buy-in, success rates, however you define success. And I think part of my issue with what we've got is there's a limitation of success. If a young person is coming to school more regularly than they were before, that is a success. If a young person is, proud to be part of a school community and talk about the positives, that is a success. If you've got staff who are coming up, turning up every day, engaging in ways, like within and beyond schools with, like the service providers for the benefit of the young people, these are successes, but none of those are being measured. I just, anyway, as you know, I can go on about it, but I just think that there needs to be more flexibility within reasons to allow the educators and school leaders who know their school communities better to do more within that, rather than it's just these restrictions.
And I think you come to, sorry, go on, you go.
Well, I've just interesting. Obviously, talking to a scientist, I'm going to refer to the fact that we all learn by osmosis because that way Bukky will go. It sounds like he knows what he's talking about. But you talked about this change and all these things, and I'm well aware. One of the things that you do is your many strings to your bow is supporting leadership coaching and getting involved, supporting others who are coming through the profession. I'm interested in terms of how you see that pressure shifting in terms of. We're trying to measure different levels of impact nowadays. We're trying to figure out that. Whereas before we were always thinking about those core curriculum measures. Now there's much other tensions and pressures in the system, and as leaders, that seems to be ever increasing. So I'm just interested in how you see that shift.
Well, the shift is really interesting because. Unsurprisingly, not many people want to be head teachers with the responsibility on their shoulders, which I think is a shame. I think part of the shift that I'm wanting to see is, like the diverse representation. So, for example, if I use myself, again, I can use myself in lots of different ways because of different things I do. I am a part-time senior leader with core responsibilities within the school, like not just leading science, but also staff training and development, all kinds of things. And I work in an organization that actually values that. Now, many sectors would be, no, you put the needs of the organization first and what we need, again, that restriction rather than that. So part of the leadership coaching I do is not just breaking through glass ceilings and having more of diverse representation into, like maybe gender, ethnicity, sexuality, all kinds of things, progressing, but also looking at different models of leadership as well and how we can actually cater for that. It strikes me as sad. And I do look back, I think when I look back at those, during the past 5 years about how flexible we were and the technology that came into that as well, it strikes me as really sad that we've gone back into that box version of doing things. I think we have missed a massive trick in relation to that in terms of leadership, as well as like the educational sector. And I think that there should be more priorities in looking at flexible working, what it means, how it can be done, how it aids well-being, and removing the label of, unless you are their full time, like from the crack of dawn until, very late in the evening, you are not demonstrating commitment. We can demonstrate commitment in so many different ways, but we've got families, we've got needs, we've got other priorities as well that need to be catered for. I would love to see a change in leadership in that regard.
We're seeing quite a bit of that. I mean, I see it within my own trust and other trusts that I'm involved with, in the sense of there's been a gradual shift, way too slow, a gradual shift in acceptance of, shared working, part-time schedules for some staff that, you share a role between two folks, but, like all these things, you allow people to have a balance between staying in the profession and also meeting the personal needs, family life, and others.
Yeah.
And I do wonder at leadership, that point you raised there about you're only showing your true colors of support for the organization if you're there every waking minute. AI is an interesting one that feeds into it. It's not just meant to be a clumsy segue, but when we talk about reducing staff workload, the intention is not so that people can put their feet up. It's so you get a better quality person. You get an educator who isn't completely overload, potentially, who's able to spend more quality time with human beings doing the things that we really value.
Exactly.
And it's almost like having time to reflect, time to think strategically as a leader
Yes.
is something you should apologize for, as opposed to recognize that should be a hard part of your working week. And I consistently meet leaders. They don't all work quite as mad hours as Matt does, but I meet leaders all around leading their schools in lots of different ways. And often they're so busy supporting the ecosystem of the school and staff, don't get an opportunity to actually think strategically, to develop themselves, to make sure that they're the best version of themselves walking into the school front door.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Hence why leadership coaching, I think, is so important in that regard, or mentoring, that space to reflect, to plan. There's lots of research and evidence that actually shows that when you have that, you as you said, you get a better version of the leader. And leaders are strategic, but as I say, there's a little bit of dichotomy about what it means to be a good leader. And like if we look around the world right now, we've got certain styles of leadership that, are being touted as the best. So yeah, I think there's a lot there to contend with, but yeah, point taken.
I think the global perspective that we see around the world and what that might shape and inform our young people, what they see on news, but more importantly on social media, is hugely divisive. There seems to be around the world a sense of you've got to nail your flag on one hill or the other, whatever the topic, the culture, the politics might be, and completely competes with our idea of inclusivity and everything that we try and do in our schools. I don't know fundamentally how we manage in schools to try and bring that conversation back together. I think we need to, in the digital citizenship sense of not believing what you see, checking its source and authenticity, but also we've seen it for our older children with some of the, the toxic masculinity and other strands. It's just, the list goes on, doesn't it?
It is, but what's really interesting is, and it's again, young people are so fascinating, is where you're seeing, particularly those, like maybe graduates and things like that, who are recognizing that they've got power, they've got agency, and actually taking back, so being purposeful in educating themselves, understanding about misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, fake news, and the importance of community, looking at the values of diversity. So it's just interesting to see where you've got, I think, a lot of dominance in the news about the divisive aspects. It's almost like it's like an underground thing that is actually going on, where young people are wanting to find out, wanting to learn, and actually taking responsibility to themselves to create the type of world that they want to live in.
You've brought the digital conversation into your school much earlier than many schools, haven't you, Matt?
Yes, I think possibly at a primary level, definitely at a primary level, possibly across education. And I think I do keep mentioning a company called STEMI from Croatia, and several years, kids, 7 years ago before COVID, they awarded them a prize at the Bet Show for robotics, I think it was, and they're still going strong, STEMI, in South America and other countries and Croatia and things. But what I keep going back to was we did a chatbot module with year 5, 6 with them, and I've got Pete Rafferty in school, so I'm uniquely lucky in that I have somebody like Pete in school every week. And we, STEMI tailored this chatbot program for us because it was 96 hours, and 96 hours for a primary school is just not, it's not going to happen. They tailored it down to 32. Whatever happened, but there was an ethics unit within that, and it was the ethics of where you're getting your information from and how you're using it and things like that. And that sort of just stayed and been passed down from staff to staff and children to children. So when they're using Notebook LM now as they are, and Canva and whatever else, generative AI or other AI, these kids seem to have an ethical understanding of how to use it, when not to use it, which is most thing, and how to check it. And I think it seems the way ahead of adults and things as well.
What you share, though, doesn't relate to many schools that at primary level, children having a safe, ethical use of AI and having access to Gemini and other things is typically more of a secondary. And in fact, in many secondary schools, there's still the fear factor of how do we upskill staff confidence first? You know, and that's my little segue, because Bukky, you do lots of training around, you know, AI, the basics of AI for school staff, but you also do bias and discrimination, those same topics. So, you know, I love the fact that Matt, to me, is everything we try and celebrate in primary schools. The values are the right things that are really, really resonate. It's why I put up with him every Saturday morning. I'm interested from your perspective of how you see shifting the dial, because there's a lot of fear around that AI topic for educators.
There is. No, you know, I did training. I just posted it on LinkedIn earlier about some training that I did yesterday. I call it my AI Starter for 10, because there are a lot of people that don't know much about AI, haven't used any AI tools, not intending to any. And when you talk about it, it's always Cybernet that comes up. The robots are going to take us over, so to speak. I think it's about education. It's about assurance as well. You know, it's about being clear about what AI means within the educational context that you use. You know, some people talk about AI, but actually it's machine learning, all those different terms and things like that. But being clear so that any conversation you have, there's clarity on that. But recognizing not just the benefits of AI, but also the challenges of AI. And I think that with the Kingsley, keeping children safe in education, 2020, where you've got the safeguarding aspects that are really heightened, as well as making sure that educators, particularly school leaders, are clear about the Online Safety Act. These provide, I think, schools with some clarity, but also opportunities just to think things through, even if they don't. So yesterday, if I give an example, I actually turned around for the first time and said, if you're not using any AI tools for teaching and learning, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because you can explore, learn from others, but make sure that you've got all the considerations in place, right? You know, the safety, where does the data go, all those particular types of things. So I think education, giving some assurance, and then giving opportunities to play with the different tools and see what it's like. Because our young people expect us, whether we use it or not, no matter our thoughts, they will come to us, which I think is really good, to say, you know, ask us about what do you think about this and this and that, all the rest of it. So providing a safe space just to dabble with it, play with it, break it almost, and think, okay, it's good for this, not great for that. And maybe then having the conversation with the organizations. There are some organizations, I'm not going to name them, I work with, who are very ethical in their approach and are wanting to make sure that those who are affected more by the digital divide and don't get a look in, they're having their skills, their knowledge, skills, and insights developed alongside anyway. I think having those opportunities are very powerful. Otherwise, it just perpetuates the fear and misinformation, but more importantly, widens the gap, particularly for young people, as I say, who wouldn't get a look in anyway. So yeah, there's quite a lot there.
I still think social media is one of the biggest issues in the world, because it has.
That is, but see, and we need to live with that. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. But that's why it was so exciting, Matt, to hear about the ethical aspects about, you know, like the units that the students in your school who are young do, because it's about understanding, you know, while it might be good in this particular part, what are the dangers? And I think training ourselves, it's almost, you know, like I've got my phone here. In fact, I've got two phones and devices. It's thinking about how we use it, but it's thinking about the ways in which, say, like social media is almost tricking us to be addicted to it and glued to it and things like that. Yeah.
Social media has caused huge divisions across the world, without a shadow of a doubt. It wasn't what it was initially created for. It was social. It was joining, you know, getting people together. And then AI's come in, and everyone's worrying about AI, quite rightly, and aware of the benefits and how it's going to change things. We've now got social media using AI. So that's putting two big things together. And I just saw the news this morning. I think Clara Hawkins shared it all about California. California is now literally literally, but almost putting that health warning on AI products like we used to get on cigarette boxes. And I thought that is absolutely brilliant, because it really is that big a danger to mental health, to misinformation bias. How are we going to keep up with it in education though? Because
Which is true. But then I think the other aspect, without being controversial, is it's the reason why we've got these shifts and changes. And that's linked down to money, really, isn't it? So I think the problem, this is why I'm trying to think about the most diplomatic way of saying it. I think this is why we're seeing the prevalence and acceleration of, say, like social media platforms and all the rest of it, because it's quite lucrative in that regard. And whether there's harm caused by it or not, we can see in, like recent news, that's not really a priority. So again, that's another reason why it's important for educators to be informed about these particular things, so that we shouldn't do this, but we can help provide just a limited effect, some guide rails around it.
Done a few events over the last month. I've had a couple this week. And one of the key bits is, even if you're an educator who right now doesn't believe there's a place and space for any AI powered tools within your classroom, which is not exactly a shock, because there's plenty of lessons that I hope there's no technology at all, frankly, but nonetheless, the conversation you've kind of alluded to, Bukky, is still that, but you still need to develop your knowledge and understanding and confidence of these tools. Firstly, to make your professional judgment as to why it's not appropriate right now for this lesson or this topic. But secondly, because children will come to you and ask you about it. And you can't talk about the vulnerabilities and the negativities and the bias and the other considerations if you don't have that context already. And the pace of change, it's only in the last week we've had Instagram saying, good news, we're going to put age ratings on some of the content, so like PG-13. And then at the same time, they've sneaked in the back there that they're going to be adding location. So you'll be showing up on a map where the child is. I mean, showing where the child's exact location is in a social platform. What could possibly go wrong with that? Then you've got ChatGPT saying we're really strict about our moral purpose and making sure we remove inappropriate content, but we're going to be adding pornography and other adult content. But don't worry, because of course no child signs up and pretends they're older than they really are, so it won't be an issue. And this is the bit where, unfortunately, money trumps the values of the organization, because there's external investors and shareholders that all want to get their return from it. So it almost increases, like every other social challenge, the pressure on education to how do we educate children to be safe. It's like saying there's twice as many trucks on the road. How do we teach you to cross the road safely? This is about how do you know what to share? How do you really trust what's happening? And of course, if we were schools in America, we'd be saying, well, if your government aren't honest and your leaders aren't honest, how can you trust it? Now, I'm not sure there's many politicians in any country, frankly, that would hold their hand up and say honesty is the key message. But I do think, without being political, I do think it becomes harder and harder and more incumbent on us, and there's a lot of folks that, because of the pressure of workload, the pressure of dealing with attendance and SEN children and SEMH, that broader conversation, the idea of, and now I'm going to acquire AI skills and AI understanding is just like, hell no, not today. Not
today. It's true.
I kind of get it. And then Bukky walks through the door and says, good news, I am going to teach you all that you need. And it's like,
but it should be, and that's the reason why it's not a one and done. So for what I did yesterday, it's like, this is like it literally is the starting point, but it needs to be part of the CPD. Even you don't have to spend, 15 minutes. I'm offering, say, on a fortnightly basis, 15 minutes to try these different tools. There are different ways we could do that. Like, for example, it could be done asynchronously. So you could do it. I think there are different ways we can actually do it, but it is tough. And this is why I said about the confusion around in the world right now, because some of the AI, some of the AI audios that are used for fraudulent means, AI videos that are so realistic that it's difficult to know what's, even experts find it hard. It's a lot to contend with. So I think, maybe with clear frameworks, we can only do what we can actually do, but we need to do it, is basically what I'm trying to say. And I think that it might be an opportunity for schools and school leaders to rethink the way in which they undertake training and keeping up with fast changes within education, particularly AI in education.
That was my cue to basically say, listeners, book Bukky. It's a little
Oh, that's
advertising
very
spot
kind.
there. You see, if you want to know more, you want to get the basics, you want to build asynchronously, audibly in the room, over the airwaves, book Bukky. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. There you go.
Thank you.
I've done my bit of support there. But you know what? There is a thing which is there's lots of folks talking about AI, and understandably so. There's lots of folks in the education space, and I will say, in all cases, pretty much exclusively, all well intentioned. But sometimes folks get carried away talking about the how to use the tools without talking about bias, discrimination, ethics, all the things that actually are the really important things to get our children thinking about and starting conversations. You know,
Mm.
I shared one with Victoria Headland, who does some great stuff. She's the AI bias girl, and I recommend reading some of her articles. I'm sure you have, Bukky, and you'll know some of those bits. But the classic example of, you know, show me pictures of the top 10 England footballers of this decade, and they're all men. Well, all the prizes were won by women, you know.
Well, cool.
I've shared in previous episodes doing some work meeting up with Sandy Toksvig, who's doing the Mappa Mundi project, which is something in Bukky or media, is famous women scientists throughout the ages whose inventions and discoveries were never documented because it wasn't appropriate to record women.
Yeah.
And then now it's like, well, if we don't digitize that, the large language models we're dipping into don't have a valid cultural and gender-based representation of what to pull into. You know, I mean, I'm interested from your perspective. How do you start that conversation? Where does your kind of your entry point for that go?
Oh my good. I mean, see the bias part. You know, it's interesting. I want to go back to what you said about the fact that, you know, you have a lot of people talk about AI in education, particularly, and talk about the fun bits, but not what is called the challenges. And I think the challenges is where we start. And part of that, as you see, you know, like bias and discrimination and ethics, is because it will force us to look at ourselves in the mirror and then think, okay, what does this mean, like moving out? What does it mean from my perspective, from a family perspective, a classroom perspective, school perspective? I'm just trying to think about the best way to put this. It isn't easy. I'll be honest and say it isn't easy, but it's necessary to do this so that at least, for example, and that's why I say to other people, you know, to educators, to try these particular tools, because you need representation, you need information from, you know, the four corners of the world, all the experiences, so that the large language models have a wider reference to deal with, rather than the norm, whatever the perceived norm is, and the narrowness of that. But equally, the flip side of that is getting anyone that uses the tool to recognize actually what's missing from it. Just ask those simple questions. Whose voice is missing from it? Why is it missing from it? What could we do to make a difference? What could we do to get them maybe to engage? And I'm sure there are different ways we can actually do that, but it's just thinking about some key questions. But you need to be, as I say, it's not easy. I think you need to be willing to learn that, make changes that, feel comfortable in that, but then think about how that then is translated to what you are wanting the AI tools to do for the young people and the learning that takes place. So not an easy one, and I get it's so much easier to look at these wonderful things. And having been in edtech for quite a long time, actually, the glitz draws you in, but it's all the things underneath, beneath the surface, that we really need to get we really need to understand. And hence why now, when I talk about AI good, I also talk about what are the things that we are not aware of, what are the things that are being kept from us that, but we need to have insights on.
Black box. The mirror bit's interesting, isn't it? Because the bit I see increasingly is that bit about looking yourself in the mirror. If you want to mitigate some of the bias, it's reflect on the question you're asking. Are you answering a question that has inherent bias, or can you mitigate by being really clear? Show me successful professional footballers of the last decade. Make sure you include men and women's teams for all ages and stages. You know, you can be more explicit in your questioning. You can ask on your iteration, what biases did you apply in your output? You know, you can choose to educate to be more aware of our own.
It is true, but it's uncomfortable. But having said that, Al, it's uncomfortable. And I think some people can get trapped in the discomfort and think, actually, I'd rather shy away from that and not actually get into that, because of, it's difficult to, think, actually, my experiences that I thought were, typical, it might be a very narrow, very privileged, very skewed experience of the world. I think it's difficult sometimes to look in that, but I think it needs to be done nonetheless. We want to do justice for students. Yeah.
Mr. Jessop, I'm conscious we're kind of coming to the end of our podcast. I always look to Matt for a few words of wisdom or a question from a different perspective, and he always shrugs his shoulders and then comes up with something really useful.
I just posted about every school needs a Pete Rafferty, and I think every school needs a Bukky.
Yeah.
Bless you.
Yeah. And I think if you can get a Bukky and a Pete to the kids with their approaches and how they think and things, and education and learners of all ages are going to be better off, aren't they? But it's a lot of educators that are with the kids now have got the pressures that they're facing is just insane.
Yes.
But no, every school should have a Bukky, Al. That's my only words of wisdom.
Well,
I love
let's
that.
wrap things. I mean, I absolutely agree because I may have mentioned earlier, book a Bukky. It's a very easy
Book a Bukky.
plan.
I do like that. Yeah, book a Bukky.
Let's close on something really positive because you are a fountain of positivity. Well-being, top tips. You do lots on well-being strategy. I mean, the word well-being, and then we talk about the list of things on our risk register
I
and our
love your
scores and
newsletter
trust.
on this. Yeah.
You know, it's tough, isn't it? But you share lots of well-being strategy advice. Where do you go right now, trying to give people a sense of there's a light at the end of the tunnel? What are your kind of the key discussions you're having when it comes to well-being?
Gosh. I think right now, it's about keeping it simple. It's about keeping it simple, keeping a priority. So, for example, keeping it simple to me will be taking care of my sleep hygiene. You know, when we're rested, our not a surprise that our levels of resilience, goes through the roof. Our capacity, our levels of patience, all those particular things that are so important in the day to day of being an educator, so important. But I think keeping it simple, having key things that you enjoy as well. I think it's so important to do that, and having accountability partners. So I'm involved in lots of different, like well-being, like circles and networks and things like that. What helps for me is knowing that someone's going to ask me quite nicely, Bukky, you said you're going to be doing this. How did you get on? I think having that, but it's part of the taking care of each other, people looking out for each other perspective. I think in addition to that, it goes back to something that we said earlier. It's particularly for school leaders, it's booking in that sacred, unmovable time to step back, to reflect, to just decompress as well. Easier said than done. There's 101 different ways we can actually do it. But I think keeping it simple, keeping it regular, and having maybe an accountability partner in whatever shape or form that actually comes is a start.
Love it. All wise words. Bukky, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you for coming and joining us for our conversation. Lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me.
And folks, please do check out the notes where we'll share details of how you can get in touch with Bukky as well.
Book a Bukky.
Time for some quality music to say goodbye.